Hey there, I'm VHS Radio, and after a longer than expected break, I'm back with another video. Today, I'm going to talk about how I profile my opponents after their initial placements. This video is also part 2 of my deep dive into a high ore, high and clustered wheat board that I played a few months ago. In part 1, I analyzed everyone's initial placements on the same board, so if you want to hear more about it, check it out. The link is in the description. So, about this video. I was hoping to post a part 2 video discussing both my pregame profile for each of my opponents and everyone's in-game decisions. But by the time I finished the script for my pregame profiles, I kind of realized that my profile discussion alone was long enough to make a reasonable standalone video. So in this video, I'm just going to discuss how I profiled each of my opponents based on their initial placements. Coming soon, hopefully within 2 weeks, I will discuss my and my opponent's decision making during the game. And away we go! Now, before the first dice roll of every game, there are a few judgments I try to make about every player, including myself. First, I establish which resources everyone produces easily, and which resources everyone doesn't produce easily. Second, I hypothesize what each person's winning game plan should be, and decide which resource hexes are the most important for accomplishing that game plan. Third, judging everyone's starting placements and hypothetical game plans, I try to rank everyone's threat levels. Unfortunately, making these judgments can be tough because when you play online, the game immediately transitions from initial placements to the first dice roll. However, profiling myself and my opponents before the game starts is just so important. Honestly, this may be a hot take, but I could argue that it's even more important than making optimal initial placements, because it influences every individual decision you make after the game starts. I gain a huge edge if I create a strategy profile for each player based on their initial placements, just like a poker player gains an edge by understanding the betting habits of their opponents before sitting down at the table. Actually, I think post-initial placement Catan strategy is fundamentally similar to poker strategy in that the job of the player is to maximize your edge in a game where the cards or resources are dealt to you, ultimately in a luck-driven fashion. You know what? I should actually make a video in more detail discussing the parallels between the two. That'd be fun. Food for thought. Anyway, let's get into a few specific examples of how profiling your opponents in this way can directly be applied into a given game. First, it can illuminate mutually beneficial early game trade opportunities. In my opinion, the early game can be the best time to make trades for resources that you think you will have trouble obtaining over the course of the game. In my experience, my opponents have generally been more accepting of trades in the early to mid game when everyone's threat level is more nebulous than in the late game when threat levels are more clearly defined. Second, creating profiles helps establish where to place the robber if a 7 rolls or I play a knight. In my opinion, understanding where to place the robber is one of, if not the most effective ways to maximize your edge in a given game. So I think it's good practice to constantly be assessing where you should place the robber throughout the game, and the pregame is no exception. Now, discussion of where to place the robber brings me to a concept that I feel very strongly about. This may seem pedantic, but I want to explain this concept from square one. If I roll a 7 or play a knight, I get to block an opponent's resource hex and steal a resource from one opponent with a settlement located on the newly blocked hex. This presents two potential strategies for where to place the robber. First, I could theoretically place the robber on a hex that would cut off a key resource from the biggest threat in the game. Second, I could place the robber on a hex belonging to an opponent who owns a resource I want and try to steal that resource from that opponent. When placing the robber, I strongly prefer blocking the key resource of the biggest game threat to trying to steal a rare or desired resource. On top of that, as the game goes on, the resource I could potentially steal generally has less and less influence on where I actually place the robber. Now, admittedly, I believe there are multiple specific scenarios in which placing the robber with the intent of stealing a resource of need is reasonable. Obviously, it's fine if I can both block the most important resource to the biggest threat on the table and steal from someone who has a resource I need in the process. I will also concede that if the game is still super young and I've assessed that there is no single player who is significantly ahead of the pack, and I can block a resource that is relatively important to multiple people in the process, then I don't have a problem with trying to go get a resource from someone who has a resource that I need. But other than these extremely specific and intentional circumstances, I feel strongly that blocking the most important resource to the biggest threat on the board should pretty much always dictate where the robber goes. Again, there are exceptions, but the key is to be intentional, to know why you're doing what you're doing. Phew. I'm glad I got that out. I promise this rant has a purpose. It's the foundation of my profiles and will ultimately come up later in my part 3 gameplay video. Bringing us back, let's outline my profile of each player, starting with myself as yellow. My setup has great number diversity, an uncontested 3-1 port expansion spot, immediate access to all 5 resources, and ignoring red, at least a share of the highest brick, sheep, and ore production on the table. My wheat production is only 1 point behind gray's, and I'm only behind purple in wood production because they're doubled up on 2 extremely weak wood hexes, which means nobody has particularly strong wood production. Given my resource distribution, I don't really have any dire needs other than wood, so I aim to approach the trade market fairly opportunistically. I believe my setup favors a development card or largest army strategy with 2 expansions. First, the 11-12 3-1 port, then the wheat port. I would technically prefer the 3-1 port on the 10 wheat, but I could be racing gray for it, and given how scarce wood is on this board, wasting a road could be debilitating. Unless gray makes an early road commitment in a different expansion direction, such as the 8 ore or the 9-2, I don't really plan on racing for that 3-1 port. Now, in my heart of hearts, I believe my placements and game plan are the most threatening of everyone at the table, followed by gray and purple, followed by red. I don't mean to come off as egotistical here. I already have a future game in the hopper where I absolutely just botched up my initial placement choices. But in this game, I'm the only player who produces all 5 resources. I have the most consistent ore, wheat, and sheep production, and I have the best number diversity. Now, let's switch to my opponent's perspectives of my own threat level. I believe, given my game plan, that my ore, wheat, and sheep hexes are the most important hexes that I own. As such, I think it would generally be in my opponent's best interests to block one of the 6 ore or 4 sheep early and often. I don't think blocking either of my wheat hexes makes much sense, because my wheat production can never fully be cut off. In my opinion, red should pretty much always block the 4 sheep, so as not to block their own ore production. Likewise, I think purple should pretty much always block my 6 ore, so as not to cut off their sheep. Lastly, I think gray would be justified in blocking either my 6 ore or the 4 sheep. Blocking the 4 sheep cuts off both my and purple's only sheep source, but I can also understand gray cutting off my strong ore because my ore is higher producing than my sheep and is needed for both cities and dev cards. Now, believe it or not, after the long rant that I just gave about placing the robber based on perceived threat, gray's situation might actually fit into that narrow window where the choice of which hex to block could ultimately come down to who, between purple, red, and myself, has a resource that gray needs at the moment. Moving on, how does gray look? Gray has amazing ore and wheat and a fair amount of wood and brick, but no sheep. I honestly have no interest in trading my sheep with gray unless they make just a ridiculous offer, because I plan to pretty much immediately spend any sheep I get on dev cards or settlements. However, I expect red and gray to be regular trading partners, as gray needs sheep and red needs wheat. I think Gray's game plan should be to expand to the 3-1 port as soon as possible and trade with red for enough sheep to buy dev cards and take largest army. Eventually, if Gray expands to the 3-1 port, takes largest army, and doubles up on their 8 ore, I think they're sneaky dangerous. However, one shortcoming of their setup is that they have to rely on ports or trades with red for sheep, which will make buying dev cards more difficult. Because Gray's game plan requires taking largest army, I think blocking the 8 ore would be the most effective way to slow down their game. They have multiple wheat hexes, so blocking one of them doesn't make much sense, and blocking their brick or wood doesn't slow down their primary goal, which is buying dev cards and cities. Alright, let's look at Purple's setup. Purple has a strong ore wheat sheep setup, and produces more wood than anyone, for what it's worth. Because Purple technically produces more wood than me, I would be happy to trade my brick, which they need, for their wood, which is a rare resource on this table. However, I suspect that they will realize how valuable their wood is, and honestly refuse to trade it for any price. Purple's resource distribution will make them a dangerous ore wheat sheep development card player with presumably 2 expansions onto the ore and brick ports up top. However, Purple has very poor number diversity, which is going to make their game very streaky because they will get all their resources in bunches. In my opinion, poor number diversity actually increases the robber's deadliness. For Purple's game to be successful, they really can't afford to miss out on payments from 8 rolls. If one of the 8 ore or wheat is blocked, their hand is just going to become extremely unbalanced in a hurry. And this makes their setup slightly less dangerous than mine, and similar to Gray, from my perspective. Now, as an ore wheat sheep player, Purple's ore, wheat, and sheep are their most valuable resources. And I can't really block Purple's sheep, but in a vacuum, I could justify blocking either their 8 wheat or 8 ore. However, I plan on pretty much always blocking the 8 ore, because the robber is super effective against Purple, and the 8 ore is both Purple and Gray's only ore source. Lastly, let's move on to my profile of Red. Red has a lot of sheep and ore and a fair amount of brick, but no wood or wheat. I think this fact is going to make it very difficult for them to win this game unless they just constantly trade their sheep and ore for wood and wheat. As I said earlier, I expect Red and Gray to be regular trading partners. And I actually may be open to trading my wheat for their sheep, but because my need for sheep is not very dire, my wheat is going to come at a much steeper price. If Red can trade enough to settle on the sheep port early, I think Red could potentially execute a strong longest road strategy. Everyone else at the table should be fighting over largest army, so Red having a sheep port could provide them the wood they need to zig while everyone else zags. However, I view Red as the lowest immediate threat because this plan can't really come online unless several things work out. Red needs to trade for enough wood and wheat to get to the sheep port, and even if they accomplish that, they still need to rely on enough 9s, 10s, and 11s rolling to be able to even afford paying 2 sheep for every road they make. As such, I plan to essentially ignore Red for the robber purposes. But if they do show signs of life that warrant concern, then I believe sheep and brick are the most important resources. So I'm content with blocking their 9 sheep, because I can't really block their 5 brick. Well, once again, we made it. We've profiled the threat level of each opponent, targeted potential trade partners should the need arise, and decided which hexes we would block if given the opportunity. Now, coming soon, I hope to release a part 3 video which analyzes everyone's in-game choices in this same game, so watch out for that. But before I end this video, I want to summarize some lessons to take away from this board. First, establish which resources everyone produces easily and which resources everyone doesn't produce easily. Second, hypothesize what each person's winning game plan should be based on their placements, and decide which resource hexes are the most important for accomplishing that game plan. Third, judging everyone's starting placements and hypothetical game plans, try to rank everyone's threat levels. And fourth, decide in advance where to place the robber based on blocking the key resource for the biggest threat on the board, not which resource you want to steal. And lastly, I just want to repeat a final lesson that I actually gave in my last video that I think is really important for improvement, regardless of your experience level. After each game, take a screenshot of the board and take a couple minutes to, think through the placements that make the most sense and see how well it matches up with how everyone actually placed in the moment. In addition, try to think about who you thought was the biggest threat before the game started and check back to see if they actually ended up being the biggest threat when the game was over. This can take as much or little time as you want, but making a habit of analyzing this can really be enlightening. Now, wait. Before you go, I have a few housekeeping items I want to address. First, starting with this video, I aim to put out a new video once every 2 weeks. I'm hoping that imposing an upload schedule will help set my routine and keep me consistently putting out content. Second, for those who don't know me, my name is VHS Radio. I am a Grandmaster on Catan Universe and frequently play on both Catan Universe and Colonist.io. My goals for this channel are to consistently analyze and improve my play, prompt discussion with the community, and present some strategies that others can use to improve their play. And third, last but not least, if you like this video, please drop down and hit the like button. And if you like my channel or mission as a whole, please consider subscribing. It tells the almighty algorithm to share this content with more people. And with that, thank you everyone for watching. Like and subscribe for more content like this, and happy settling.